We continue looking at the current economic crisis with Martin Feldstein, who joins us from Boston. He is professor of economics at Harvard University and president emeritus of the National Bureau of Economic Research. He was Ronald Reagan's chief economic advisor during his first term in office. He is advising Senator John McCain now. I am pleased to have him on this program, to have him back on this program to talk about this crisis and where he thinks we need to go. Welcome.
It's nice to be back with you.
A couple of questions about how we got here, both in terms of the long term and in terms of decisions that have been made since it became headline news in all papers and on all television programs around the country, beginning with Bear Stearns. Longer term, shorter term, how we got here, what we did.
Well, I think the longer term origins of this were primarily in the housing market. There were other problems, but it was the housing market that has created the problem that we have today. And it happened because of an unusual combination of three things. We saw a tremendous bubble in house prices in the first part of this decade. We saw loan-to-value ratios that nobody would have believed 10 years ago, where large numbers of people were getting first and second mortgages together that put them in the 95 or 100% loan-to-value ratio. And then all of these pieces of paper were securitized instead of being held by the originating bank. And that combination really created the tinder that led to the conflagration we're seeing now.
And so now we come to where we are with the Congress. Are you happy with the $700 billion rescue plan as it has been modified, not going back to the beginning, but as it has been modified in terms of executive compensation, in terms of oversight, in terms of whatever it says, of whatever else has been said about short selling?
Well, the modifications do some protection for taxpayers, but the trouble with the plan is that it doesn't really get at the fundamental cause, the real root of the problem that is facing us, and that is the downward spiral of house prices.
How would you do that?
Well, there may be a better way of doing it, but I have one idea in which the government could build a firewall, could stop the process. Let me take a minute and just remind you and the listeners that the unusual thing about mortgages is they are no recourse loans. And that means that if an individual defaults on his mortgage, the creditor can take the house, but he can't take anything else. He can't go after other assets or after income. There are now some 10 million homes with negative equity. 10 million homeowners owe more on their house than the house is worth. About half of them owe 20% more or higher than the house is worth. So they have a very substantial incentive to default, to walk away, to rent for a few years, and buy after prices have fallen further. The danger with that is that that will simply push down house prices even more. And I think it's that fear that there are going to be many more defaults, many more foreclosures, that is poisoning the mortgage-backed securities that are being held by financial institutions. So somehow we have to stop that process in which the inevitable further fall in house prices, and the experts say it's going to take another 10 or 15% fall to get back to the pre-bubble level of house prices. We need to find a way that will not trigger defaults and foreclosures and an overshooting down of house prices. And the idea that I have proposed is mortgage replacement loans. The federal government giving individuals an opportunity to swap a portion of their mortgage loan for a much lower interest rate loan from the government, reflecting the government's low cost of funds, but with full recourse. And if that happened, then we would have a kind of firewall, a barrier that would stop house prices from falling. Of course, the individuals would benefit from the lower interest rate, but the key point is that the system as a whole would become more stable, and the mortgage assets, mortgage-backed securities in the financial institutions wouldn't have the same degree of risk that they do now.
And who would you make this offer to?
I would make it to anybody who currently has a mortgage. I could imagine somebody saying, well, let's put a dollar ceiling on it or something like that. But I think the simplest thing would be to say the government will offer this mortgage replacement loan, 20% of the outstanding mortgage up to some dollar amount. I've suggested up to $80,000. So someone with a $400,000 mortgage would be able to borrow $80,000 from the government at very low cost. That money would, of course, not go to the individual, but would go to the holder of the mortgage. But the individual would see their monthly payments substantially reduced. But the key thing is they would no longer be able to get away from the loan by defaulting on their mortgage. And so the process would become much more stable. A further fall in house prices would be self-limiting.
And what would be the dollar amount you put on this for the federal government and for taxpayers?
Well, again, it's not like other kinds of spending, because it's really just a swap, a trade of IOUs from American homeowners, which by law those IOUs could be made senior to all other non-collateralized debt, a swap of those for government bonds given to the mortgage holders. So it's very different from the current bailout plan, where the government is taking in low-quality bonds, low-quality mortgages, and other kinds of derivatives for federal money. But the total price tag on this, again, as I say, it's not spending, it's a swap of one asset for another, could be about the same order of magnitude as the Treasury is currently talking about, $700 billion, or even conceivably somewhat more. But it's not taking in bad assets for good money.
What do you think of the AIG plan?
Well, you know, I'm a director
of
AIG,
yeah.
So I really can't comment on the AIG situation.
There is, though, an insurance element that's gotten into this. Is that a good idea?
Well, I don't
rescue
know how.
plan.
I mean, I know that they're now talking about an insurance element. I don't know how they would begin to price that insurance on the mortgage-backed securities and on the portfolios that these individuals have. So I just as I can't imagine how they would run a reverse auction, as the Treasury originally suggested, on this complex and numerous different kinds of securities. So I just don't see how you can. It's not like FDIC insurance, where the presumption is that these are banks with ordinary mortgages that are almost sure to pay off. These are highly impaired portfolios. That's why we have this problem. And so putting an insurance tag on it, I don't think is a very feasible activity.
Has this changed your belief in the marketplace at all?